Just because the offseason's over doesn't mean that the trades have completely stopped.
Give me the biggest hits, like the top things that you would do to turn these guys around.
I'd start number one to see if I can get trade value for Saquon Barkley.
Blockbuster trades throughout the 2022 calendar year aren't done just yet. So today, these are the 10 most notable stars that are likely to switch teams in season. Saquon Barkley. 2022 marks the final season of Saquon Barkley's rookie contract. Unless he goes off and regains his 2018 and 2019-like form, it's hard to think that the Joe Shane, Brian Daboll regime will want to invest so much money at a devaluing position. The New York Giants are starting with a fresh slate. Again. Shane already cleared out some of Dave Gettleman's pricey free agent signings, including Logan Ryan, Kyle Rudolph, and James Bradbury. Shane and Daboll don't owe loyalty to Barkley because they weren't here when Gettleman took him second overall in 2018. The Giants project to be one of football's worst teams yet again in 2022. If Barkley isn't playing up to his potential, the G-men may as well give him a fresh start ahead of the deadline. On the flip side, if Barkley returns to elite status, maybe the Giants would feel inclined to get something in a trade rather than lose him in 2023 free agency. Running backs never score much in trades, but Barkley could be different. If we see 2018-2019 Saquon Barkley in the first half of 2022, a lot of teams will be lining up for his services in a potential trade. Stay tuned. Raquon Smith. The Chicago Bears standout linebacker publicly requested a trade, citing his belief that the new Ryan Poles-led front office doesn't value him. Like Barkley, Smith is set to play out the fifth and final season of his rookie contract. If the Bears aren't going to reach an agreement with Smith on a long-term deal, they better trade him soon while his value remains high. For the Bears, an ideal scenario would see Smith play out the games until a trade is reached. He can increase his trade value ahead of the deadline, and there'd be zero shortage of interested teams for one of the game's premier game-changing linebackers. The Bears are in rebuilding mode, so one could understand the hesitancy to sign Smith long-term. If Poles can get some valuable draft capital for Smith, he shouldn't be shy to honor the trade request. Smith could really score you a nice return from a Super Bowl hopeful. Amari Cooper. With Deshaun Watson being suspended for the first 11 games, the Cleveland Browns' 2022 playoff hopes are in significant jeopardy now. Wonder if Jimmy Haslam is already wishing for a mulligan on the trade. Anyway, it's hard to envision the Browns vying for a playoff spot in a stacked AFC North with Jacoby Brissett now starting. It's not too early to think that Cleveland may have to sell ahead of the 2022 deadline. Perhaps the fire sale would include Pro Bowl wideout Amari Cooper, whom the Browns acquired via trade with the Dallas Cowboys. Cooper is unlikely to produce high numbers in a rush-first offense with Brissett throwing him the football, so Cleveland may look to cut ties relatively early. Lots of receiver-needy teams should be in the market on Cooper. Hey, he saved the Dallas Cowboys' 2018 season, and Cooper probably wouldn't cost much on the trade market at this point, given his high salary and up-and-down production. If Cleveland is already falling out of the playoff race by the trade deadline, do not be shocked if Cooper is one of the first notable stars dealt. Robert Quinn. Raquon Smith, of course, isn't the only star in the Chicago Bears front seven who could soon be on the move. Three-time Pro Bowler Robert Quinn may be on borrowed time in the Windy City as well. Now, he didn't request a trade or anything, but Quinn is coming off a historic season in which he racked up 18.5 sacks, the most by a Bears player in a single season. There's no way that he repeats that as a 32-year-old. In other words, Quinn's trade value isn't going to be any higher. And if he gets off to another torrid start in 2022, the Bears would be wise to trade the veteran pass rusher rather than let Quinn play out the entirety of his contract here. You can never have too many quality pass rushers in today's NFL, which is why at least half the teams would probably have interest in trading for Quinn. And if you're Poles, oh baby, just think about all the draft picks you could acquire ahead of the deadline if you do move out both Quinn and Smith. Jesse Bates III. Admittedly, this one feels like a bit of a long shot. The reigning AFC champion Cincinnati Bengals are in win-now mode and would ideally keep Bates around to enhance their chances of winning the Super Bowl, since he placed a franchise tag on Bates back in March. However, the two sides were unable to reach an agreement on a long-term deal, and so the Bengals must now decide if they want to hold on to Bates for one more year and risk losing him for nothing, or trade the stalwart safety now and get something in return for him. It's extremely unlikely, but what if the Bengals fall short of expectations and don't view themselves as legitimate title contenders leading up to the deadline? Doesn't it make sense to trade Bates since, you're unlikely to sign him long-term? The return would be pretty high, that's for sure. Or what if they're playing like a bona fide championship contender? Maybe the Bengals decide to trade Bates in exchange for another impact player. Swapping Bates for a disgruntled star on another team could be a win-win scenario for all parties involved. Bates is a star of that Bengals secondary, but if you look at how Bill Belichick operates in New England, there's always a way to balance the win-now window with the long-term future. Belichick has traded away a plethora of stars in their primes, and then he went on to win a Super Bowl anyway. See Brandon Cooks and Jamie Collins as recent examples. The Bengals could absolutely deal Bates ahead of the deadline, get future resources, and still contend for a title. But obviously, in an ideal world, he plays up to his usual standard. The Bengals remain contenders, and then they try again on a long-term deal after the season. Jadeveon Clowney. Death, taxes, and Jadeveon Clowney signing one-year contracts. Some things just never change. Even after a stellar 2021 season with the Cleveland Browns, Clowney was content to re-up for a one-year pact worth a max value of $11 million. But, as we talked about on the Amari Cooper entry, the Browns may have to sell off at the deadline if they're out of the playoff race early. Clowney's production can be compared to a box full of chocolates, because you never know what you're gonna get. It seems like he's a Pro Bowler one year with 9 sacks, and then a non-factor the next year. Either way, he is a strong trade candidate to keep an eye on. The Browns may be happy to just give Clowney away if he's not playing up to his usual standards. But, even if he is playing up to his usual standards, they should still be content on dealing him for future assets. Better than letting him walk in 2023 free agency without getting anything in return, right? Laremy Tunsil. Tunsil was the subject of trade rumors earlier in the offseason, but the Houston Texans star offensive tackle wound up agreeing to a restructured contract that saved up to $8.4 million in cap space. Keeping Tunsil for the time being makes sense considering what Bill O'Brien gave up for him back in 2019. And Tunsil is among the NFL's best offensive linemen who's in the midst of his prime after all. But GM Nick Caserio wasn't here when the Texans made the trade for Tunsil, nor when they handed him a lucrative extension in 2020. Caserio is building this team how he sees it, and coming from the Bill Belichick tree, he could view Tunsil as expendable now. If there's one thing Caserio learned from Belichick, it's better get rid of a player too early than a year too late. The Texans are likely going to be a bottom feeder in 2022. Does it really make sense to keep an expensive offensive tackle around long term? Houston will have the capital to draft a suitable replacement in the 2023 draft if they so desire it. And a guy like Tunsil can fetch you a handsome return at the deadline. Plenty of contenders would be keen on adding a quality offensive lineman to accelerate their Super Bowl push, and Houston could probably drive up quite the bidding war for his services. If the Texans are as bad as we expect them to be in 2022, keep an eye on a Tunsil trade. He could be the first domino to fall in Houston's fire sale. Danielle Hunter. It feels like Hunter has been the subject of trade rumors for a while now. But at this time, the Minnesota Vikings seem content to keep him as they try to end a 3-year postseason drought. The problem with the Vikings in the Rick Spielman, Mike Zimmer era is that they kept players for way too long until they began to significantly regress. New GM Kwesi Adofo-Mensah can't make those same mistakes. So if the Vikings show few signs of being a legitimate playoff contender leading up to the deadline, Adofo-Mensah should consider a fire sale. And that could start with his 2-time Pro Bowl pass rusher who missed all of 2020 and all but 10 games in 2021. Danielle Hunter is one of the game's premier sack artists when healthy. He has 60.5 of them in just 85 games played. But he'll be 30 in 2 years, his injury history is too hard to ignore, and the hefty contract isn't the bargain it once was. Many added more youth to their secondary this year, but the front seven has too many injury-prone and aging guys like Hunter. If the Vikings don't turn it around early this season, Adofo-Mensah would be wise to deal Hunter and focus on rebuilding the defensive line next year. Orlando Brown Jr. This one also feels like a bit of a long shot. But if the Kansas City Chiefs can trade Tyreek Hill in his prime because they failed to reach an agreement on a contract extension, then anybody not named Travis Kelce or Patrick Mahomes shall not be deemed untouchable.
Can't touch me. Except for you. You can touch me.
the Chiefs haven't been able to reach an agreement on Pro Bowl offensive tackle Orlando Brown Jr. A 26-year-old offensive lineman of his caliber doesn't exactly grow on trees, and it is imperative that KC either extends Brown or trades him for immediate help. So, what if the rest of Kansas City's O-line performs well and they decide Brown is expendable? Wouldn't it be wise for GM Brett Veach to trade a young superstar like Brown to another team in exchange for immediate help or even future assets? What if you can get a first-rounder for him at the deadline? Veach is like that of Bill Belichick. He knows when it's time to get rid of a star player, but also knows how to keep a title window open long-term. He could absolutely decide to trade Brown and make other several deadline moves to maximize his team's Super Bowl window. Not saying a Brown trade definitely will happen, but everything should be on the table here for KC. J.J. Watt. The future Hall of Famer is entering the final season of his contract. The Arizona Cardinals lost superstar Chandler Jones to the Las Vegas Raiders in free agency, leaving a 33-year-old and injury-prone J.J. Watt as the lead pass rusher. The Cardinals should contend for a playoff spot this year. Kyler Murray is loaded with playmakers around him, and the defense is at least not horrible on paper, but we've seen Arizona collapse late in the season in 2 straight years now. What if they get off to a sluggish start with that brutal schedule? Would it really make sense to keep a pending free agent around if a Super Bowl run feels like a pipe dream? Plus, Watt himself might be keen on a trade to a Super Bowl contender as he enters the twilight years of his career. Even if the Redbirds want to keep him, Watt could decide to push for a trade ahead of the deadline. And there should be plenty of interested suitors in Watt. He is definitely an in-season trade candidate to watch, especially if Arizona struggles right at the gate. But which big name do you think could get traded before the deadline? Join us in the comment section below. If you like this video and learned a thing or two, clicking the like button helps out a ton. And hey, we appreciate it. If this is your first time coming around to TPS though, subscribing is a great idea because we put out videos like this every single day. But as always, thanks for watching and we'll see you guys next time.